Alright, I'm going to go through the reasons why the Windows Mixed Reality Controller is so god-awful. I think it's worse than both the Vive Wand and significantly worse than the Touch Controller. I think out of the three, the Touch Controller is easily the best, but I'm going to talk about why this one sucks. So number one, and the most obvious to me, is the shape of the controller at the bottom is wrong. Like, see how it's flat on this horizontal plane and really thin in the vertical plane? I don't know how obvious that is from this angle, but basically it's wider than it is tall. Here's an example of a good controller where the Rift controller, where it is really short horizontally and really tall vertically. So you can see it's like really wide on this angle. And the reason that's good is because when you hold the controller, right, you want it to feel as natural as possible. Like you want to do as little with your hand as possible. And the problem with this size is that it doesn't fit your natural hand angle. So like leave your hand like kind of loose and limp, like just in a resting position, like try and shake it out and then just kind of leave it limp. So it's like kind of this shape, right? So if I have the Rift controller, it just fits in there perfectly. Like if I move it out, this is what my hand wants to do when none of my muscles are moving. It just fits right in. And the reason for that is because your fingers kind of like, there's this deep crevice in your hand, and your fingers want to curl in pretty close. They don't want to be out very much. So with the Windows Mixed Reality Controller, when you're holding it, it's not in that small relaxed grip. It's pushing your fingers out. So every time I put the controller in, you can see my fingers kind of get wider than they want to be. So that kind of makes you aware that you're holding it the whole time. So compare that to this, which is, you know, it fits in that gap, in that spot perfectly. And just as backup for this, like the Xbox controller is widely considered like one of the best designed controllers of all time. And a big part of that is comfort. It's really just, it just fits in your hand, you know, the way your hand naturally wants to hold it. And you can see here a similar thing. It's pretty tall vertically, really pretty short horizontally, and it fits really well just kind of in that natural resting hand position. So the Vive Wand has a similar problem where it's too wide and it's not tall enough. There. So when you hold it, you know, it does that same problem where it kind of shoves your fingers to the side. So you're always kind of aware that you're holding something. Second problem, the trigger's in a miserably terrible spot. So again, I'm just really quick. The touch controller is great because when you put your hand in it, again, this goes back to the point I was making before, it's just in a natural resting position. Like you can see the angle of where my finger is and how it doesn't move when I put the touch controller in. It's like literally the exact same spot. I don't have to move my finger at all, and it's already ready to pull the trigger. And when I pull the trigger, it's using my whole kind of finger, like both of these top two knuckles. See, it's even got this little crevice right here. I don't know how well that comes out, but there's a little just seam that indicates, okay, you know, this is where my two knuckles are going to go. So this trigger, if I leave my hand loose and put it in here, it's wrong. It's in the wrong spot. Like I'm like 5'10". My hands are not particularly big. I mean, they're a little bigger than average, but if I take the controller out, see how far out my finger is? My finger doesn't want to be that far. It wants to be like here, you know? So when I put this on, my finger has to extend. So whenever I'm even just holding this neutrally, I'm always reminded by this controller pushing out on my finger that it's too extended. Like my index finger doesn't want to be out this far. It wants to be here. But instead, the controller kind of pushes it out, shoves it out more. And then the other thing you can see when I'm just holding it normally is that the trigger's in the wrong spot. With how extended my finger is, only like the top knuckle can get on that trigger from the natural holding position of the controller. So now I'm not pulling with the two knuckles, I'm just pulling with one. Sorry, this is not a great angle. But the problem is that it's kind of weird to pull just on the tip of your finger for the trigger. So even the Vive controller, you know, if I'm holding it in its natural resting position, you can see that when I'm pulling the trigger, I'm pulling it with this part of my finger. I'm not pulling it with like just the tip, which feels weird. You know, you've got a good handle on it, and both of your knuckles kind of pull down on it at the same time, so that feels good. So they just totally got the position of this trigger wrong. It's too far out, it pushes your finger out, and it's just no good. Another reason why this trigger is bad is because this feels so terrible, like pulling with the end of your finger, that a lot of the time you'll end up wanting to choke up on the controller, and this will put your finger in kind of the right spot. So you can see the triggers right here, and now I can kind of get my two knuckles over it. But now you can see where my thumb is. It's pushed way the hell up. Like, my thumb wants to be here from the design of the controllers, but I have to push it up here in order to get a better angle on the trigger. So now I'm like holding this in a really fucked up way that's not, you're not meant to hold like this, and it feels weird. Like they designed it wrong. So yeah. All right. And then further in fitting with the idea of ergonomics is one of the great parts about the Rift controller is that it doesn't matter what I do with my hand, the controller wants to sit in it. The center of mass is just like in the center of the controller, so I'm not like putting any effort into holding this in my hand. My hand is pretty limp. Obviously not going to be 100% limp, but it's pretty damn limp. And you can see that I'm jiggling this in all directions, but because the center of mass is right in the middle, and because it wraps around my hand extremely naturally, it really doesn't matter what I do, and the controller always kind of wants to sit in the perfect spot in your hand. That does not work for this thing. You jiggle it and it immediately tries to leave your hand. So what that means is that while you're holding it and interacting with things, you have to put extra force to hold it in place. It's not like a big deal in terms of how difficult it is. It's obviously not a big deal to kind of just grip it. But it's just a problem in terms of like, you're always reminded that you're holding something because you have to think about it. You have to feel, oh, you know, this thing's trying to leave my hand, so I've got to pull it back in. And that's a similar thing with the wand. You know, if I do this, the center of mass is way the hell out here, so when I jiggle it, you know, it tries to leave. So, on that. Those are the main things about why it's bad. It's like they saw the touch controller, and then they had a 5-year-old draw up some plans for it, and they were just like, yeah, it looks good. So all these things just make it a nightmare to use in comparison. It's not like objectively terrible, but once you've played with something better, you just don't want to use it anymore. And this is all tracking and everything else aside. It's purely the design of the controller. So if you want to use it effectively, you have to choke way the hell up. Your thumb's in an uncomfortable position. It's not natural to grab these things. It's pushed way the hell up, and it doesn't want to stay in your hand, and the shape is all wrong, so you're forced to kind of hold it in an awkward way. And it's just, after using the touch controllers, it's like night and day. Anyway, I hate the Windows Mixed Reality controllers.